Never waste a good crisis. And when it comes to the economic crisis, don't waste it when it can have a very positive impact.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste.
The way we're going to win over the long term is not just militarily. We've got to win over hearts and minds. And what that means is we've got to invest in countries that have no educational infrastructure, have no means for young people to get ahead. We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
Stay tuned for politics and religion.
Well, this should make you proud to be a Texan if you are one. Texas Senator takes action to support Israel. U.S. Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, has proposed a resolution supporting Israel's right to defend itself and condemning last week's actions by the Turkish-sent six-ship flotilla that wanted to break Israel's blockade in Gaza. The text is blunt in condemning Hamas for rejecting Israel's right to exist, for its human rights abuses against its own citizens in Gaza, and for its opposition to peace efforts in the region. It also condemns Iran for supporting Hamas. Now, this all seems like simple common sense. We know that the United Nations was the entity that formed the nation of Israel back in 1947, partitioned Palestine to form the present Israeli state. However, Hamas has steadfastly, from its beginning, refused Israel's right to exist. It's in the Hamas charter that Israel must be totally driven out and totally destroyed. And yet, here we find after Hamas launches rockets into southern Israel, as a result, Israel establishes a blockade in order to inspect all humanitarian aid that's going into the Gazan Strip and making sure that there is no weaponry involved in any of the shipments. After Israel was forced to do that in self-defense, now all of a sudden Turkey decides to try to run the blockade. Now remember, there's absolutely zero evidence that anybody's starving to death, that people are not being fed. However, Israel does not want cement and other construction types of materials going into Gaza because Hamas uses those to build tunnels underneath the fences into Egypt in order to smuggle arms, suicide bombing belts and other things into the area of Gaza. Can anyone blame them? But it seems like everyone has been kowtowed into submission and cowardice because they were unwilling to speak up. Well, Republican Senator John Cornyn has now said that he is proposing a resolution supporting Israel's right to defend itself, condemning Turkey's attempt to break the blockade. Now remember, blockade is a legitimate form of self-defense. It says it right in the UN Constitution. So to try to say that Israel is doing something unjust is absolutely dishonest. The latest news coming to us today is that there wasn't even any humanitarian aid on the ship where the 9 Turkish people died. So there was no humanitarian aid. They were simply trying to make a point. They were trying to run the Israeli blockade, and Israel said, sorry, we're not going to allow that to happen because this is part of our self-defense operation. So now then Cornyn is saying the time has come for somebody to tell the truth, and he's calling upon the U.S. Congress to stand up for what is truly right here. I mean, the very United Nations that has designated Israel as a country and also has designated Hamas as a terrorist organization, all of a sudden finds itself in its anti-Semitism. And don't ever doubt it, the UN is very, very anti-Semitic. All you have to do is see all the votes against Israel. I mean, there have been all kinds of unjust things happen around the world, but there have been more resolutions against Israel in the history of the UN than against all other entities on the face of this planet combined. Did anybody hear me? one little nation, the little tiny nation of 7 million people called Israel. There have been more resolutions against that single nation emanating out from the United Nations than against any other entity, all the other entities on the globe combined. We've got nearly 200 nations on this planet. There's a lot of wars. There's a lot of terrorism. There's a lot of conflicts taking place. But for some reason, Israel is the whipping boy of the United Nations. It's absolutely latent with anti-Semitism. Of course, we've got the breaking story of Helen Thomas, who, when asked what should Israel do, she said Israel needs to get out of the Middle East. And someone said, well, then what should Israel do? She said, well, go back to Poland, go back to Germany. Well, the result of that has been that, Helen Thomas has lost her job. She's been forced into retirement. And now then the rabbi that took the pictures has received 25,000 anti-Semitic emails. As the fight for a strengthened world court moves into high gear, Sudanese President al-Bashir, who is under indictment by the court for war crimes, has asked why the court picked him out for prosecution. Why didn't you arrest George W. Bush and Tony Blair for lying to the UN about weapons of mass destruction being in Iraq? Al-Bashir asked. We'll talk about these and other late-breaking world developments today on Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it.
Well, the world is reeling and rocking today. There are so many developments almost simultaneously. One of them that certainly demands our attention. In the country of Holland today, actually, there's been an election. The election was held yesterday. The totals are coming in now. And Mr. Geert Wilders, who produced a film called Fitna, which actually shows different scenes of Islamic terror and riots, together with scriptures from the Quran, which mandate that this is the way that Islamists should act. That little film, which was banned in Great Britain, caused a lot of stir in the nation of Holland. Well, Geert Wilders is simply saying the time has come to realize there's a difference between Muslims and Islam. He says the Quran is so full of these mandates